they figured out a way to make someone do what they want them to do.
Hey, this is Unrefined Podcast. Welcome to another episode. Hey, you guys. We're here for another podcast, and we have an interesting show for you today.
Yeah,
Lindsay, I've been playing with this app over here, and we have all these really cool sounds like this, like when Lindsay says something funny, I can go, hey, yeah. Or do it again. Okay. Anyway, so
I didn't hear anything, but okay.
You didn't hear anything? It's supposed to do like a
I didn't hear it.
It's supposed to do like a drum.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm in preview mode.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I heard it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, we're talking about a pretty serious topic today. I figured I'd started on a little kind of a crazy note there, you guys. It's just Lindsay and I, but we have taken a deep dive down a rabbit hole that actually really intrigues me. Lindsay, does this interest you, this topic?
Well, yeah, I mean, I really got kind of into the whole Frank Olsen story in here, which we're going to talk about a little bit. The doctor
Yeah.
who, quote
Killed
unquote,
himself.
Jumped or fell.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
I think there was a third option there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Was murdered. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, either way, even if, but we'll get into that more later. But yeah, I watched some of the Wormwood documentary and just seeing his son Eric, just sharing his whole ordeal, just getting the story out there. I really got kind of into that, and yeah.
Man, it's really sad because we grow up thinking that our government is the good guys and that our government, never fails, which is it's just the naivety of being young. And we watch shows where the CIA, even though they're doing clandestine kind of off the book stuff, they're still the good guys fighting those commie reds or whatever other nation in the world. And when you start to go down these red pill rabbit holes, you begin to see that we don't even have a clue in a lot of ways. So why don't we start out? Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'm not sure if I'm willing to say espionage is like inherently evil. I'm not going to go that far.
Right.
But I've always just kind of been uncomfortable with, how can you trust guys who keep secrets and spy and poison, It's
that leads to the whole question of, can you trust them when they whistleblow?
Yeah.
So, but before we really go deep, let's start off with a little bit of a primer. So why don't you, if you can, in a few sentences, give like what your working definition of MKUltra is?
Well, it was a CIA program, and really you got to go back to two preceding programs, Bluebird and Artichoke.
Yeah.
Which it was the same program. It just kind of
evolved.
They changed the name.
When Montauk too,
and
right?
Initially it was all about interrogation. That we want to come up with better interrogation techniques.
Yeah.
They, the excuse was, well, the Soviets and the Chinese have all these amazing, crazy things going on, and we want to be proactive and make sure we can do the same stuff. But yeah, MKUltra started in 1953 and officially ended in 1973.
Officially.
Whatever that means.
And,
Richard Helms had a lot of the files destroyed. Luckily, he didn't get them all. But
Yeah, they were like misfiled, weren't they? They were like in the wrong place. So it's like a clerical error caused us to be able to find out about it.
I know Colby, one of the directors around 75, gave some, to Eric Olsen, Frank Olsen's son.
Yeah.
And I found these on the Internet Archive.
Yeah, I went through them too, man. It's just,
they're hard to read.
Yeah.
And I think that was deliberate.
Oh yeah, well, it's like legalese. It's in, not necessarily legalese, but it's in that double speak. It's hard to follow and stuff, and it's just the sheer amount. If that was just a few of the files, can you imagine what they destroyed?
Yeah. So Alan Dulles, the infamous, was CIA director. I don't know that there was ever a good one.
No. He was the first one,
when
right?
It started,
after World War II?
And Richard Helms. Yeah. And Richard Helms was the CIA director when they, like I said, on the books ended it. And of course, Mr. Gottlieb was involved the whole time, and his passing out the candy, passing out the little drops to everybody.
Yeah. And we'll get into him. So,
yeah.
What is your take? I wrote down you guys, you got to realize we really went deep into this and did a lot of research and stuff. It's so fascinating, and there's so many different directions we can go with this, and we're going to go a few of them. Right now, we're going to start with, like I said, with the CIA aspect of it, but later on, this caught on with the elites and some of the what we would call mind control cults or satanic Luciferian cults, which we'll get into later. But
I got into a lot less of that in my research. So.
Yeah, well, see, that's my interest is the occult and that type of stuff, and how it bleeds into Hollywood and a lot of that kind of stuff, and then the whole Laurel Canyon thing, and it just fascinates me how many of these rock stars that we've grown up to love and think are groovy are actually CIA assets, supposedly. A lot of this is speculation, and I want to throw that out there, y'all. We know some of this from the documents, but a lot of it is going to be speculation, and it's going to be our speculation, other speculation. But it's like with Bigfoot. You have so many sightings from so many different types of people from so many different places. You start to think, well, maybe this is not a coincidence anymore. So the objectives, I think, of the CIA, I wrote down that it was basically, you said first it was a interrogation technique, but then they wanted to use hypnosis to control the morality of the subject, and then also use trauma to fragment the personality to cause alternate personalities of the subject. Now, what in your opinion would they use that for? Like the alternate personality and hypnosis. What are some examples of usage in espionage?
Well, that your Manchurian Candidate type situation, man. You could use one of the alters to do it.
Yeah, what actor was in the first one? I know it was Denzel in the second one.
It was man.
Yeah,
it was Sinatra, I believe.
Was it Frank Sinatra? Wow, I couldn't remember. Yeah, I remember Denzel, and Frank Sinatra was in the first one. Wow, that's just really cool. Interesting, though.
It was Frank Sinatra. I'm pretty sure
with his influence, and a lot of those old movie stars experimented with LSD back then, and I think he was one of them.
Yeah.
So, but that's another rabbit hole.
I don't know if he was, but I know Cary Grant did to some degree,
and Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart. Yeah, well, and man, there's also this idea that the counterculture was into a great deal. There were already other influences on it, but
right.
The counterculture of the 60s in many ways was created by this program.
It's a big psyop.
Yeah. Allen Ginsberg has kind of admitted that.
Yep.
He got his first hit of acid from one way or another They didn't always know they were getting it from one of Gottlieb's programs, but he was usually behind it. And even, I think Timothy Leary.
Yeah. Yep.
Ultimately, based on a program going on in Mexico by Gottlieb, that was his interest in a lot of it.
Well, and
getting
that
into the whole hallucinogens and things like that.
And that brings in Ken Kesey and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I think
Yep,
he was
man, yeah, working at a facility, a institution, and stealing the dope and giving it away to people. Apparently,
yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is just it could go on, but let's stick with the CIA for a while and kind of so what they I think discovered after they realized they couldn't really make a truth serum, even though they did use it as a truth serum. I wrote down a story I thought was really interesting in 1951. There was this story of these Japanese guys that were working for Russia, and they figured that they were working for Russia, but they didn't know for sure. So they were given actually depressives and then stimulants, and depressives and stimulants, and eventually they confessed and they dumped them in Tokyo Bay. So that was strictly under the orders of Gottlieb and his involvement there. And so let's go on. Let's go on to Sydney Gottlieb. Let's talk a little bit about him. We can't have a show without at least starting with him.
Yeah, man, the poisoner in chief, as Kinzer called him.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, he's a weird guy, man. Like I said, he's kind of this. He was kind of a hippy dippy guy himself. On one hand, he lived really simply. He lived in a house that didn't even have indoor plumbing. Self-sustaining, a lot of stuff people like today. And part of him seemed to have this kind of altruistic, wanting to fix humanity. Some of his final days were spent in India working at a leper colony, which, man, makes you wonder, well, what did he get into there?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And he just makes me think of this whole notion of altruism. It's funny, I was listening to Camp Hermon. They had Fern and Audrey, the two SRA victim.
Yeah, they deal with parts and stuff. Yeah,
things like that. And Tori actually said something about how altruism, at the end of the day, just means the ends justify the means more than it does any concern for humanity. If a few people fall through the cracks, I'm paraphrasing her, but she basically said the ends justify the means. So you often see these altruistic type guys like Gottlieb are capable of doing great evil on the one hand, but also being really nice. He was good with his family, and
he's very moral. I mean,
by a lot of accounts, a delightful guy.
Well, I mean, we've heard the same reports of Hitler, that Hitler was a quote very moral man, and one of my favorite philosophers, Dallas Willard, in his book Divine Conspiracy, he deals with Hitler in the aspect of, in his weird, warped view, he thought he was doing a favor to the world by killing the Jews. He thought he was eradicating something that was going to cause problems in the world, and that came from basically dehumanizing them and making them, rats, rodents. That's what he viewed them as and stuff. And so, what do you do in a house it has rodents? You trap them and you kill them, and that's a good thing if your house is infested. And that's how he looked at life. And Dallas Willard always says that everyone, no matter how evil they are, have good intentions. And that's, I guess, why the old saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And but I like that. I like that statement you made there that Tori made about altruism. That's totally true. There's a word for that. I can't remember what it's called. But basically the gist of it is it's for the higher good. You can do all these malicious, evil, things, but it ultimately is for the higher good. And that's what a lot of the elites and they that are out there justify themselves. I saw that in some program. They were talking about that whatever it's called, that phenomena of how people convince themselves of that the ends, justify the means. So you're totally right, bro. I mean, it's and I think Gottlieb, that was his thing. I mean, and to give a little background with him, he was a Nazi. He came over with Operation Paperclip. If you don't know what Operation Paperclip was, it was an operation where they brought over thousands of ex-Nazis, not just for the rocket program, but for other things too. And Gottlieb was a chemist. And the reason it was called Operation Paperclip is because their folders, they totally erased their backgrounds and gave them totally new, like you would in the witness protection type situation, but their folders had paper clips on them. So that's how it was, why it was called Operation Paperclip. And that's just a little primer for anybody out there who didn't know what that was. And so all these
I didn't know Gottlieb was a Nazi.
Didn't know that. He's a Jewish Nazi. That makes it worse. He sold himself out to his own to his
Well,
his own
man,
people.
you mentioned Operation Paperclip. I mean, that's where a lot of this started. Is they got a lot of these ideas from people like Kurt Blom.
Yeah,
forget how. Yeah, everybody knows about Werner von Braun and the
rocket program,
rocket scientist.
Yeah,
but nobody knows much about the just like chemists and
psychiatrists,
biologists,
and
they brought over
and occultist. I might add too.
Yeah, they didn't just want the rocket boys; they wanted the dope boys too, man, and the head shrinker boys and all of it, man.
Because a lot of these Nazis
probably utilized them more.
Well, a lot of these Nazis were involved in like OTO, Oriental Tipulus, what is it? Oriental Tipulus Ortis. I'm butchering the Latin there, but basically the
Crowley's thing.
Yeah, Crowley's organization, and they were part of occult secret societies and all that kind of stuff. And so we brought them over here, and I heard this not too long ago, and I just think it's a truism. Reality is that the Nazis, the Germans lost the war, not the Nazis. The Nazis just changed locations. Nazism is, and how I envision it a lot of times I tell people is, if you've ever seen Spider-Man and particularly the Venom franchise, I see Nazism as like that black alien suit that's Venom. And it just needs a host. And I think Nazism just needs a host. And you want to take a wild guess where that host is now and who the host is? Hey, my unrefined friends. I just want to tell you guys that I am so thankful that you are my life. Some of our best fans have been writing to us, and I just so encouraged about how lives are being transformed and people are getting something out of this podcast. I mean, that's what it's all about. That's why we're doing this, is to glorify Jesus and to just look at the world and have a more open view of the seen and the unseen and the supernatural in the world. So while we're doing that, we're going to handle all different kinds of topics. But see, what I'd like for you to be involved in or part of is our members only group. Things that are coming in our members only group that are going to just blow your mind. Not to mention, there's going to be episodes in there that you won't be able to hear just on the normal episode channel. So make sure to visit our website at unrefinedpodcast.com and check out our members only community. I just can't stress the fact that, we're after building a community, and there's so much out there, you guys, and there's so much coming. I really believe we need to build these strong communities of Christ followers to be able to handle what might be coming in the future days. We're sure that you'd be a good fit, and we cannot wait. I can't wait to see you there. Lindsay, us. the United States.
Yeah.
Not the whole thing, but in a lot of ways, in a lot of areas, in a lot of, as we're seeing right now with the CIA stuff, we became the new host for Nazism. And the irony of it,
Yeah.
the
Well,
irony,
even just that sort of pencil pusher attitude you saw with the Nazis, just that the way they, Eichmann made it just sound like, oh, we had to take care of these numbers of people somehow. It was just all numbers on paper to him
yeah,
as people were being killed by the millions. In this case, these were just experiments. These people may as well have just been lab rats.
well, yeah. There's interesting.
Particularly the ones that didn't know what was going on.
There was two accountants. There was Eichmann and Schindler. Both of them
Mhm.
took care of numbers,
Yeah.
and one of them had humanity at heart, and the other one had, honestly, Luciferian and occultic stuff at heart. So, I mean, that's where a lot of this comes
Yeah.
from. I can't prove this, but my speculation is a lot of this mind control and MKUltra ultimately comes from the sciences from the Nephilim back, before the Gen 6 and all that kind of stuff. But that's just a speculation. We just want to
Yeah.
kind of stick with what we're going through here. And yeah, Gottlieb was an interesting character to say the least. I mean, he headed up the whole MKUltra program for those. I don't think we said that yet, but he headed up the whole MKUltra program, and like I said,
Yeah.
started with LSD and it just bloomed and blossomed from there. So let's talk about some of the things he did in his evolution of the program.
Yeah. Well, the main one that jumped out at me was the thing he did in San Francisco, the Operation Midnight Climax, where he basically had this brothel and would get the prostitutes to bring men there and drug them because he wanted to see how, LSD and other things and sex
Yeah,
affected each other. And,
yeah,
it, yeah. And he had a guy that would basically look through a two-way mirror as this happened.
yeah. Which is
And,
really pervy, but it's all in the name of science, right?
yeah.
Yeah, all in the name of science.
Yep.
Yep, science. So yeah, I told you guys the story what Gottlieb did with the Japanese to got them to confess and all that kind of stuff. And so, like Lindsay had said earlier, basically the program ended in what 1973.
3.
Yeah, 1 year before I was born, which is interesting. It ended, but that's just what the congressional when they did the congressional investigation where they delved into all this kind of stuff. That's just
Yeah.
what they
The
found.
church committee
Yeah, yeah, the church committee.
and and then the presidential version of it, the what was it? The Rockefeller. I mean, that I ought to tell you right there whether it could be trusted. The president,
Yeah,
the administration
was it
was
under
doing it, and
Eisenhower
it's
or
got Rockefeller name attached to it.
Gerald
The
Ford?
Rockefeller. Had this earlier.
Yeah, that was during Gerald Ford's administration, I think.
Yeah, Rockefeller Commission.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Like you said, that's always a suspect. That's a red flag name. But
and Dick Cheney was involved in that. So
interesting. I didn't know that. That's
yeah,
fascinating. That's fascinating. He had to have been pretty young then.
he edited the results basically. So
Wow. See
is
that?
it even useful?
Yeah.
That's what I gotta ask.
Well. I mean, that just shows the. There was this book back in the day that it followed the scarlet thread through the Bible. It was a Baptist book about the martyrs, the scarlet, with the Trail of Blood is what it was called, and I just think about that when we look at stuff like this. We just kind of follow the trail of blood or the trail of bodies or the trail of whatever, and to see Dick Cheney being involved in something like that.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't want to get involved in logical fallacies and and stuff like that. However, there comes a point where things aren't coincidental anymore. It's just not a coincidence. So, but
Yeah.
I want to tell a little story.
Well, and yeah, I was talking with a friend about this, and
Yeah.
when I told him we were going to do this, and he goes, and he asked me, how long did that thing last? The MKUltra? I was like 20 years, 53 to 73. He's like, if they had run it 2 or 3 years, they were just experimenting. At some point, this just becomes just torture.
Or
20 years.
Or something
What
else.
were they trying to find out doing this? Yeah.
I mean, my viewpoint, and this is speculation, I want to throw that out there. My viewpoint is I wonder if it actually became training. I wonder if they perfected some things, because there's a lot of things out there that whistleblowers have identified that worked. Remote viewing and the different stuff they tried. I just wonder if it became a training type thing, and they began to train people off book CIA to do this, and that leads perfectly into my next discussion. What I'd like to talk about with this is it's the same stuff. We're calling it MK Ultra, but it's mind control is what it is,
Yeah.
and that leads to the whole mind control cults and underground Luciferian / Satanistic type cults that they used for the different programs. I mean, I read they have different programs when they would program an altar. You had an alpha, which is just basic altar stuff, just obedience type based stuff. Then they'd have a beta program, and then they'd have an omega, a gamma, and all these different Greek letters meant something different to the altar that they programmed in there. Like one of them, I can't remember which one. I want to say it's Omicron, or it might have been Gamma, was a self-destruct /
Mhm.
self-mutilation program. And so this is how it evolved, and it came out into the mainstream, and the elites, I'll just call them whoever they are. I always joke with Lindsay that if we know their name, they are not the leaders. And which is really kind of crazy, but it's true if you think about it. They are not going to be out in the public eye. They are not going to be people that we know.
Yeah.
They'll be. I've heard people say, "Oh yeah, well, Hillary Clinton is the ringleader," and I'm like, "Oh no, she's low level." I mean, she's in it, but and maybe low level is not good, but she's not. She's not the they. She's part of the they. She's a soldier,
Yeah.
not necessarily a general, maybe a colonel. I don't know. Anyway, but it spread outside the CIA, and that's why I wonder if all these years they've been training it. And we have several, and this will tap into one of our loves, mine and Lindsay's loves, movie predictive programmings. I mean, I was just telling a friend of mine today, the top two that I'm going to steal before Lindsay can steal is Jason Bourne is an example of Black Ops and MK Ultra and having a handler and going through the whole trauma and drug process to program to make a killer. And he actually forgot his programming. He had amnesia, and he had to relearn who he was, which was fascinating because in some parts of his brain, he still was a killer and he could still operate in it. It just wasn't in his prefrontal cortex, which is who he is. So that there's an
Mhm.
example of predictive programming, and the other one is Stranger Things. I mean, it hits
Yeah.
it hits hard. It hits all the issues from remote viewing, psychokinetic or telekinesis, alternate dimensions. I mean, everything. The tanks that they had. I forget what they're called. Isolation tanks. Is that what they were called? Yeah,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah.
I think there's
Isolation.
another word for them.
Yeah, where in Stranger Things they would put 11 in that tank with the water where she could focus, where she could be sensory deprived and could, and they would inject her with the whatever drug of choice they used, and and all that stuff. So those are two. Lindsay, what are some more? I know you have a wide movie knowledge. What are some more predictive programming of?
Well, we talked about Manchurian
Yeah,
Candidate
that's a huge
already.
one. Yeah, huge one.
That's the one that comes to my mind immediately. Yeah, I like both versions of that movie, but
I love the
I mean
Denzel one. That's
that movie
awesome.
wasn't far from the truth.
No, it wasn't.
Um,
It makes you wonder.
yeah, in fact, let me just read this. Let
Yeah.
me read
Yeah.
this
Okay.
document.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, page 53. Hypnotic experimentation research.
And this is from the documents.
Yeah.
This is straight from the horse's mouth, you guys. This is the source.
Okay, so yeah, the Frank Olsen project has the names that were redacted. Okay, it was Miss Jackson and Miss Pierce. A post-hypnotic. Okay, so yeah, this is MKUltra program CAI document number 190691, page 1 excerpt. On Wednesday, the 10th February 1954, hypnotic experimentation and research was continued in Building 13 of the Mount Massive Preserve in Colorado using the following subjects. Material abridged. A post-hypnotic of the night before, pointed finger, you will sleep, was enacted. Mrs. Jackson and Pierce immediately progressed to a deep hypnotic state with no further suggestion. Miss Pierce was then instructed, having previously expressed a fear of firearms in any fashion, that she would use every method at her disposal to awaken Miss Jackson, now in a deep hypnotic sleep, and failing this, she would pick up a nearby pistol and fire it at Miss Jackson. She was instructed that her rage would be so great that she would not hesitate to kill Miss Jackson for failing to awaken. Miss Pierce carried out these suggestions, and if you read more, it talks about how the gun wasn't loaded.
Yeah, they put blanks
But
in it.
still,
Yeah.
that's Manchurian Candidate stuff there.
Absolutely.
What else do you
Yeah.
call that? I mean,
Yeah. And
they figured out a way to make someone
do what they want them to
It
do.
makes you think about the whole Sirhan.
Oh yeah.
He claimed he didn't remember killing Bobby Kennedy.
And Lee Harvey Oswald always said he was a patsy.
Yeah.
So, and I think he was actually a CIA asset, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't MKUltra or didn't have a handler in such a thing. And that's the same time period. And we all know, I mean, it's common knowledge that one of JFK's, we always seem to want to think the mafia did it, which they probably were involved in it. But the biggest thing is Kennedy had the CIA on his hit list. He was going to divide it into a million pieces because he saw what it was becoming. It was becoming an entity that was outside of America. I mean, let's face it, you guys.
Yeah.
It was becoming its own entity, which there's a show right now on Amazon, which reminds me of that, called Citadel. And it has there's these two competing groups. It's very James Bond-esque. But it had these two intelligence agencies that are outside of any country or government or anything like that, and that's what the CIA was quickly becoming. And Kennedy had it in his sights, him and Bobby both. So
Well, it's funny you just mentioned Citadel and Bond. You can even take it back to Bond and maybe even other spy movies and entertainment before that. It just, the problem with it, as entertaining as it is it kind of glamorizes a lot of this evil when you think about it.
It does.
Makes it cool.
Makes it cool.
Well, we're the good guys after all. And yeah, look, we're probably better than a lot of people, but doesn't that make us more responsible?
Well, what's the Spider-Man quote? With great power comes great responsibility. I love that quote.
Yeah.
And we're probably going to be held accountable as a country one day for that. In the possibly near future. But I actually took this a direction too prematurely, I want to back up a little bit if we can, Lindsay, and let's go
Yeah.
into this. This is going to be your thing because this is your speciality when it comes to this. Is let's talk about Frank Olsen and the whole ordeal with Frank Olsen. So give us the lowdown on that.
Okay. Well, Frank Olsen was a Army veteran. He was working at Camp Detrick in Maryland, the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratory. He was recruited by distinguished UW scientist Ira Baldwin. He had worked with biowarfare originally.
I have a story about that I'll tell later when we get into that. But anyway.
Stuff like aerosolizing anthrax.
Okay, let me tell my story right. This is a perfect point. Did you know, and I found this out researching this, that the Navy in San Francisco Bay, okay, and this is legit, this is Freedom of Information Act, in the San Francisco Bay, they sprayed this bacteria for days off Navy ships in the bay. And the reason it worked in the San Francisco Bay is because there's a lot of fog and all this stuff. So they infiltrated, aerosoled this whole area of San Francisco. 11 people got sick and 1 died. And they were just doing that just to see whether you could aerosol some make airborne some type of biological or viral warfare to be able to do. I mean, that's crazy. We did it to our own people. I mean, and yet we're going to go over to Syria or Saddam Hussein and judge him for gassing his own people. I'm not saying him gassing his own people is right. I'm not saying that. But, where's our moral high ground? I mean, what have we done to our own people? Sorry. End of rant. Keep going, Lindsay.
Anyway, yeah. He was brought in to the MKUltra project in 1953 and started, having misgivings about it.
Was he a scientist?
At one point he traveled to Berlin. Yeah. He went to Berlin at one point and they believe saw some really rough torture and interrogation there.
Yeah.
And just started having misgivings about it. Well, and started voicing those misgivings.
Yeah.
Which wasn't okay. Well, anyway, he gets invited to this meeting called the Deep Creek Rendezvous, basically where Gottlieb was there. Just a lot of guys associated with MKUltra were there. And their cover was that they were supposed to be script writers, editors, authors, and lecturers for sports magazines and things like that. It's just this lodge near Deep Creek Lake, the Deep Creek Lake Retreat in Maryland. And unbeknownst to Olsen, there was a cover to the cover. Was that they were all going to be dosed with LSD that night. And he just slowly began to unravel as far as anyone could tell. He was told he needed to, after this happened, they spiked a bottle of, I think it's called Cointreau, some sort of liquor, with LSD. And he just kind of started unraveling. His wife and family noticed it. And then sometime after that, they sent him to a psychiatrist who wasn't actually a psychiatrist, Dr. Harold Abramson. He was an allergist who had worked with Olsen in the past. I was wondering what allergists had to do with this, but yeah, I mean, allergists are concerned with how allergens and things, particles diffuse through the air. So, and Olsen was working on aerosolizing bacteria and viruses and things like that. So, made sense. Abramson did some psychiatry on the side apparently, but he wasn't really known as a psychiatrist. But more importantly, he was working for the CIA at the time.
Yeah.
So they made sure this was all in-house. Sometime after he met with Abramson, he got drugged along with some other guys, but for some reason it really hit him harder, and he just happened to have been voicing his disaffection and misgivings with a lot of the stuff he was involved in here with the MKUltra. He attempted to resign at one point.
Right.
And after this whole Deep Creek rendezvous, he gets sent to this Harold Abramson, who's supposedly, analyzing him or giving him some sort of psychiatric treatment.
Yeah, helping him out. Yeah.
So, it was around 2 a.m. on Saturday, November 28th, 1953. He either jumped or fell. That's the way they, from his room at the Statler Hilton Hotel in Pennsylvania.
Or the other option.
No, in New York City. So it was the Hotel Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Or the other option, he was pushed.
It's called the Hotel Statler then, I think.
Yeah.
And, jumped, fell, or was pushed.
Which I think is what Eric believes, right? Eric believes that he was murdered. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's what I got. He doesn't know for sure, but yeah, just I would say either way, man. You drive someone nuts, you dose them, and they start having bad trips, and you send them to some guy who works for the CIA to start psychiatric treatment. The Wormwood documentary on Netflix implied that he was using some sort of thing where he would just cover his eyes and ears, or like make it where he couldn't see, and cover his hands where he couldn't really move them, and ask him questions. Under that state, it was harder and harder for him to answer those questions, and it would just kind of frustrate him and just slowly break him down. But yeah, I guess my point was that either way, you drive someone to kill themselves. Maybe that was how they killed him, you know?
Yeah. And that's hard to prove in court. So
yeah. So yeah, either way. But yeah, I tend to think maybe he was thrown out of that window. But there was a they got a letter later from a guy who was working at that hotel who just was like, hey, something was sketch about this. Armand Pastor, yeah. He was the night manager of the hotel. Dear Mrs. Olsen, after reading the newspaper accounts on the tragic death of your husband, I felt compelled to write you. At the time of your husband's death, I was the assistant night manager at the Hotel Statler, New York, was at his side almost immediately after his fall. He attempted to speak, but his words were unintelligible. A priest was summoned, and he was given last rites. Having been in the hotel business for the last 36 years and witnessed innumerable unfortunate incidents, your husband's death disturbed me greatly due to the most unusual circumstances of which you are now aware. If I can be of any assistance to you, please do not hesitate to call me. So yeah, the night manager wasn't buying, this was just a suicide or something like that. He thought there was some sketch stuff about it. Apparently, the hotel operator connected a call through the switchboard from a man in room 1018A. It's a weird the way that number is. The operator heard him say, well, he's gone. The man on the other end replied, that's too bad, and then hung up.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like someone who just heard the news of I mean, he didn't even give any details. They just both know what's being said there. Well, he's gone. That's too bad. I mean, yeah, it doesn't sound like somebody hearing about a suicide.
No.
He doesn't even say suicide. He just says he's gone.
No.
So yeah, his son Eric was never satisfied with it and just stayed on his mom about it. His mom just didn't, was just like, why do we have to talk about this again? And yeah, he just latched onto it and wouldn't let go. And they finally, because of that, that's why we have some of these documents. He got an apology from the president and got a lot of these guys to admit something. And again, the CIA made sure that it was on their terms, and they made it in such a way that he even said himself the documents they gave them they just gave them documents and said, here you go. you figure this out. And they only got one chance to do that. And the documents were hard to understand. They didn't have anybody there to help them. Okay, what does this term mean? What's this abbreviation? What's this acronym? They just were like, here you go.
Yeah.
But, we'd have nothing were not for Eric Olsen not being satisfied with this jumped or fell explanation and knowing his dad and remembering who his dad was and yeah, so yeah, that in a nutshell, I guess, is the Frank Olsen story.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I have to check that out on Netflix and take a dive.
Yeah.
I want to go into. I read a lecture. This is going back. We went to Frank Olsen. I'm swinging back into the whole mind control cult stuff, which is it's the fruit of the same tree. There's a lecture that I read out there. It's by a guy named Dr. D.C. Hammond, and he is a distinguished counselor, psychologist, psychiatric. He actually was which I found really interesting, was the former language interpreter for Presidents Bush and Clinton. And anyway, so he has written journal articles and 8 books. He's an expert on hypnotic suggestions and metaphors and Ericksonian psychology and stuff like that. So this guy is not a slouch. I mean, this guy knows what he's talking about. But he, at this speech, I don't remember what year it was. I think it maybe in 1992. He gets up in front of all these peers, his people, to do a lecture on hypnosis and multiple personality disorder, and he talks about the whole ritual abuse is how it's. We use the term SRA, which is satanic ritual abuse, but not all ritual abuse is labeled satanic in the sense of it's not done necessarily by a Satanist. It's all satanic. It all comes from the enemy. However, it's not all satanic ritual abuse, which there is that too. And he just kind of followed the trail, that mind control programming and brainwashing. I mean, look at the Mansons. There's rumors out there that Charles Manson was actually a CIA asset, and it was part of the whole countercultural movement. And the family was an example of some of this mind control cult. There's been several other cults. The one that River Phoenix was a part of. What is it? The Family? Is that what it was? Or the Family?
Yeah, the Family.
The Family of God, maybe. But is it?
Yeah.
Was it Wilver Victor? I can't remember his last name. It starts with a Wilverville or something like that. Wilville. I don't know if it was started by him or if it was another dude, but they were the ones that they had hookers for Jesus. I remember that they had these.
Yeah.
Anyway,
flirty fishing. They called it
flirty fishing, and so this mind control stuff was all involved in it, and they got their cue from the experiments of the mind the MKUltra, which you said ultimately came from Gottlieb. He would start these little projects, and they all began to take on a life of their own, and these different groups of people started to take the information. That's why I suspect that maybe in the 20 years it was around, it was maybe the CIA did quit it, but others took on the mantle, took on the torch, and began to do it themselves, which I don't think the CIA quit it. I think they just sub-opt it to even deeper black ops that people don't know about, like.
And David Berg was the guy.
David Berg, that's it.
The Family International.
Yeah. So
still technically around.
Yeah. So what this Dr. Hammond in his lecture said, and this just blows me away. He says when you find the same highly esoteric information in different states, from Florida to California, and from different countries, you start to get an idea that something's going on that is very large and well coordinated. So I've gone from someone not knowing what to think about it all to someone who clearly believes ritual abuse is real. I have had concern because of personal threats. I have finally decided to hell with them. If they're going to kill me, they're going to kill me. It's time for me to share more information with therapists. And so he did in this lecture, and he went into a great detail. You can find it online. It's the Greenbaum speech, hypnosis, and MPD. Which MPD, you guys, is multiple personality disorder, and that's been changed. The newest psychological book that came out changed it from MPD to DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, which is actually a better label for what really happens. And just a little side thing, I'm going to chase a rabbit here. DID is basically when our bodies, our minds, our brains experience incredible amounts of trauma. And this is particularly why it's very effective in children, because they don't have the capacity to handle the amount of trauma that adults do. But anyway, when any person, any human being, their brain experiences an amount of trauma that exceeds their capacity. And what capacity, you guys, is basically the level that you can handle. That's just a big word for the level of whatever you can handle. It reaches capacity. When we reach that capacity, our brain naturally splits or fragments or alters or constructs different parts. That's actually a God-given thing after the fall, because it helps us not to be constantly aware of all our traumas and our junk and our sins and all this type of stuff. So what God had meant for good, the enemy turned for evil. And the interesting thing about DID is that everyone has it. I mean, we've all said the expression, part of me wants to go to this party and another part of me doesn't. Well, I mean, even in our language, we provide room for such things. But in this DID, you have spectrum of this DID, and on the right end of the spectrum, the extreme part of the spectrum, you begin to have what you call alters, which are basically what multiple personality used to be. There was this movie, I can't remember, it was back in the 60s or 70s, about a woman who had multiple personality disorder, and I can't remember the actress that played her, and I can't remember the name.
Many Faces of Eve, I think.
It's something, yeah. And but when you get to the alter part on the spectrum, these people become different people, and they can be programmed by these mind control specialists. By using hypnosis, they can be programmed to become another person. An example of this is they would do this with spies. They would break an altar apart, and there would be a deeper core altar, which was the real them, and they would go into a countercultural movement of communism, and they bought the whole enchilada, and it was all real, and it could not be discerned as being fake with body language or anything like that, because in reality, that part of them completely bought into the communism. And so when their handler would get a hold of them, they could call up the core part of the person, and the core part of the person would remember the part of the altar and could feed them information about the communist cells. So that was kind of how it was kind of came about. And then,
oh wow,
yeah. What happened with the mind control cults and all that kind of stuff is just, number one, money is a primary motive. That's a huge motive, is they want to grow their cult, and you do that. You grow the cult by love bombing. Love bombing is an example of some mind control techniques that you begin to use with people. A lot of these mind control handlers, what they would do is they would love bomb, and then they would abuse. And that confuses the brain and causes the alters to split. I mean, usually with these mind control cults, they didn't use the extreme, like electroconvulsive type things, or the isolation tanks or stuff like that. They were forced to use not really technology, but just the homegrown stuff, like beatings and stuff like that. And then that enters the whole adrenochrome thing. The abuse that they would give these children to begin to split them up in their altars, they would take their blood and they extract the adrenochrome out, and they would get high off of it, or it would be used for other purposes, or whatever they did it. But it would come from particularly young children and their trauma, and when they would secrete the adrenaline, and that adrenaline would get in their blood, in their serum, and that would become the adrenochrome. And whistleblowers have said that it's unlike any other drug has ever been out there. So, I mean, just the kicks of it, a lot of the Hollywood and people like that get out of it. But there's no telling what other therapeutic or destructive things you can do with it. So, this whole mind controlling and then brainwashing comes into it. You know, uh, I can't remember exactly, but I think for a long time the family, Charles Manson's family, they wouldn't turn on him. They had Stockholm syndrome, which is another example of how our brain does this mind control type stuff in splits. But this doctor in his practice, he was just overwhelmed because this was not something happening in isolation. It wouldn't just happen in San Francisco. It wouldn't just happen in New York or Georgia or wherever. It was happening all over the place, and he knew that there was some kind of web or system. And that leads into even deeper rabbit holes. And so I'm just going to stop that rabbit right there and shoot it. But the whole DID and satanic ritual abuse subject is out there, and it's very real. I had a minister one time professionally tell me that he thought it was bunkus, and that they were, those memories were suggested memories, and etc., and all that kind of stuff. He said because all the same type of people what is his exact words, the same type of people that are SRA are also the same type of people that get alien abducted. Like, that in itself is fantasy and make believe and etc. And we don't even know the ramifications of that. Getting real supernatural, getting real fringy. We don't know what these interdimensional beings are doing with people when they abduct them. It might not just be body experiments. There might be mind control going on as well. So a lot of times people don't think about that. Anyway, so the reality is that any type of person can be disassociated. And like I said earlier, most people are disassociated to an extent. They have fragments and parts. A lot of them won't really manifest as a complete personality. However, in some extreme cases, they are. And you begin to talk to them a lot like you would for example, in the Christian ministry, a deliverance ministry, like you would a spirit or something like that. And that they're actually parts. Matter of fact, I have a story about this, and we Sandy and I, one of the first times we did ministry, dealing with the healing ministry and prayer counseling and stuff, we had a hard case, and this hard case was a person who I was trying to cast a spirit out. I was trying to get rid of the spirit that was oppressing them, and this, that, and the other. And the part, which is what it was getting aggravated at me because it was not actually a demon. It was actually part of the person. And Sandy and I didn't have any training or framework or even know what that was at the time. It was early in our ministry. And so I would keep trying to cast it out, and it wouldn't respond to the name of Jesus. And it was kind of hostile. And anyway, and so we finally just gave up because it was above our pay grade. But later on we learned how to do ministry with stuff like that. And you truly have to have the gift of discernment of spirits when you're doing ministry with that. But this mind control is out there, and it's a web, and it's all over the place. I mean, I think of the experience with, I think it was the Army guy named Michael Aquino. He was the one that had the military base had tunnels from the military base to a daycare center, and so
wow.
yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's what's so crazy about this. I mean, you can go really deep, and a lot of people think that the military is involved in some of this stuff. Different intelligence groups in the different branches of the military. This Michael Aquino guy is a Satanist. I think he's more the Anton LaVey uh, stream of Satanists, which we really are atheists. But we all know from our Christian worldview that he still is he
Yeah, he
still is
started that group, the Temple of Set.
yeah, they still are Satanists. At least yeah, Alice,
Set.
huh? Yeah, Seth.
I was just gonna say Set is the Egyptian god has often been associated with Satan. So
Yeah,
one way or another, he
yeah. Uh, and the other interesting thing about that is these when they would do the mind control stuff, they would do it. They start and they obviously they do it with the bloodlines, and that's another whole program and show we don't want to get into today. But with the different family bloodlines, they want to. That's how they control these different family bloodlines, and how they want to use them for their means and ends, the elites and purposes in the world. So, and then you see the permeation of it all out in Hollywood as well. How many times have we seen Katy Perry have a defrag, is what I call it, right in the middle of everybody? There's even YouTube videos of it.
yeah
And Kanye West broke down with his, and I think he actually got help and got out of a lot of his MKUltra hand. But anyway, there's one guy I think is pretty famous that handles a lot of these stars that seems to be close at hand with particularly a lot of these female pop singers. They all go through the same stages. It's really interesting, and it just makes you wonder. But
yeah
that goes back to the whole mind control, MKUltra, that whole umbrella, and so anyway,
yeah.
uh, what else, Lizzie? You want to follow up with here that you want to add to our conversation?
It's easy to be fascinated by this stuff, but man, I also found myself getting just fatigued reading some of it.
Yeah, yeah,
It's hard to read, and
totally.
a lot of it's very technical, and
It's hard to
especially a lot of
believe.
the documents. Yeah,
It tilts your brain that we have the technology to do a lot of this stuff, which is obvious where the technology comes from. But yeah,
yeah,
you're right. It's very fatiguing. But God, I want to kind of
yeah,
end this podcast on a but God note, and us realize that despite MK Ultra, mind control cults, what's going on, they, them, the elites, all of that, but God, He is the Lord of heaven and earth, and He is ultimately, proveniently, and providentially guiding this world, and He's in charge. I mean, I'll just come right out and say that the Lord is in charge. It doesn't mean He makes all these things necessarily happen, but He is in charge, and
yeah,
we have to remember that, and we have to realize that. I just think that the sheer amount of people that are out there that are that have been through this SRA, that have been through this DID type stuff, even in little small cults, little small organizations, they learn about it and they operate in it, And I mean, look, what just came out with the was it the Dugars, the shiny happy people thing, and just a lot of toxic religion can
yeah,
border in on this mind control. You don't necessarily use LSD, but you use a lot of the mind control principles, a lot of the traumatics and traumatic type stuff, and no telling what goes on behind closed doors. I'm not saying that about the Dugars, but that was a
yeah.
pretty
I mean,
exposing.
yeah. the whole DID discussion you had opens up a whole nother episode we can have later.
Yeah.
I mean that's a whole nother topic on its own. That I thought we'd touch on, but I think that's cool that you went a little further into it, and that's, man, maybe we could have a guest, someone on who's done ministry in that area. I know you've done ministry in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, it would be fascinating to have somebody on that's dealt with it. A lot. There's not many people out there. Mostly it's deliverance ministry, which it's a ditch. There's two ditches to me. There's one ditch that it's all demons, and there's another ditch that it's no demons. And I think the road is the balance. But yeah, like you said, there are answers for you out there if you've experienced anything like this. That if you need help, you can find people that can help you. Get out of these things that you're in. Even if it's mild,
yeah,
it doesn't necessarily have to be SRA or ritual abuse or any of that kind of stuff. Just dealing with our different parts and fragments is truly helpful. And I just want to glorify Jesus right now. I just thank him that because of his shed blood on the cross and because of what he did and because he rose from the grave and is now seated at the right hand of the Father, and he is the victor over all this stuff. He is victorious, that we have the authority and the ability to be able to do this ministry and to minister to these kind of people. So what say you, Lindsay? I'll give you the last word.
Well, I was just gonna say, man, if there's anyone who listens to our show, I wonder. I don't know. Maybe people who listen more, maybe for some of the ministry, spiritual stuff, but who raise your eyebrow when you hear conspiracy theories and things like that. Well, just look at what can be proven here. I mean, we know the government was experimenting on people without them knowing it, and that deaths resulted in that oftentimes. And it's just right there for you to read. It's so maybe just look at that and consider that next time you raise your eyebrows. I mean, this is real stuff. MKUltra is just one example. There's many more.
Yeah.
Of stuff that we know now.
Yeah, it's come out from the Freedom of Information Act, and know this, you guys out there too. The whole concept of conspiracy theory was actually started by the CIA to lemonize and alienate the people who believed a different narrative. So keep that in mind.
Yeah.
That's a pejorative term now that they throw out. I mean, you even watch it in the mainstream media. Though, if you're a conspiracy theorist, that means that you're a nut job. And what's so crazy is they'll throw out their own conspiracy, but those aren't conspiracies. So we won't go there. I appreciate, Lindsay, our time together today, man. It was awesome. I love talking about this stuff with you. We have a keen interest. I didn't even go into a lot of the assets in Hollywood and the music industry, but that's okay. That might be another program for another time. Yeah. Fascinating stuff. But like you said, we have to pull it back in and we have to ground ourselves in the Lord. So
yes.
Yeah. So we will see you guys on the other side, and hasta luego. Or
thanks, guys.
See you later. Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.